Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on the program this evening. I'm sure it's going to be an exciting time. We've got a fantastic panel set up to discuss this very difficult topic. And I think it's going to be an exciting time. So I will be introducing the panelists very shortly. I also welcome the virtual studio audience. Thank you so much for being here today. It's going to be an amazing time. And for all our viewers on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, we are live across all our social media handles this evening. This is such an important topic that we just want to make sure that we get the message out there. We make sure people know about what's going on. Before we move on, please, if you haven't already shared the link, you've got the YouTube, Facebook, whichever one of those platforms you're on, please do share this, invite your friends to the session, and let's get this important conversation going. Now, I would introduce our guests for this program this evening, starting with Professor Abigail Ogwezzy-Ndisika. I'm sure I got that right, Prof.
Yes, you did.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much,
Prof
and
is the
welcome
first
everybody.
Prof is the first female professor of the Department of Mass Communication, University of Lagos in Nigeria, one of the premier universities in the country. At different times, she served as the head of this department. Her research interests is in the gender dimension to development and strategic communication. She has worked across multiple sector projects and with a number of multilateral and bilateral agencies. Prof, you are welcome to the program this evening.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'll move on to our second guest. Um, I think congratulations should be in order, Doc, because our guest this evening, Dr. Ferdinand Osuagwu, was just a few days ago appointed by the American Psychiatric Association to the Committee on Climate Change and Mental Health. Congratulations to you on that appointment, Doc.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Osuagwu is a general psychiatrist. He's also a child and adolescent psychiatrist. He's based in Michigan in the United States. He's a board certified in adult psychiatry. And he's also an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the Central Michigan University and also at Michigan State University. Doc, you're welcome to the program this evening.
Thank you very much.
And our last panelist is Mr. Dimeji Adebayo. He is a dual qualified lawyer in the United Kingdom and in Nigeria. He's a practicing solicitor, and his specialization is in family and immigration law. So I think he's well qualified to help us deal with some of the legal challenges that I'm sure are things we need to deal with when we're looking at the topic for tonight. And for those in the virtual studio, I would say that thank you very much for being here. We're going to go through some of the questions, some of you pre submitted questions. We're going to look at those questions in a minute. But before we go into the details of today, would like Prof, who is chairing the session today, to share with us a few words, and then we'll start dealing with the questions once she's done with that. Prof, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening from Nigeria because I'm speaking from Nigeria. First, to our hosts, other panelists,
One second. It looks like we lost the prof just as she was about to start speaking there. Um, while we wait for her to get back on, let me just pass this quick information to us regarding the format for today. For those who don't know, who may just be joining us online, we do have a studio audience today, a group of people who have um, submitted some questions that they want to ask to the panel. And in future, we're also going to be making sure that we give you, our viewers, the opportunity to be part of this virtual studio audience as we step into all the different social issues that are coming around. So what we'll do, I think we have Prof back now. We'll switch back to her and we can move on from there. Prof, do we have you
Sorry
back
about
now?
the breaking. Yes, sorry about the breaking transmission. It's the new normal, and we have to learn to cope with it. The
Absolutely.
important thing is that, yes, we're gathered today. This is the inaugural town hall meeting of Interface Media, and it is a global platform for engaging on development discourse. And through this platform, we'll be giving voice to the voiceless. And as we move on today, you'll recognize that the issue we're going to discuss actually is trying to address the plight of those people who don't have a platform like this to speak. And so, through this town hall, we'll be trying to amplify issues and draw the attention of duty bearers to the plight of right holders. For me, I'm glad to be part of this auspicious gathering today. Uh, when I was approached to be part of the panelists and even to chair it, I had no choice but to accept to chair this discourse. Today, we'll be discussing gender based violence, commonly referred to as GBV. It's an issue of increasing importance. And regrettably, during the COVID-19 period, we all saw that there was a spike as the cases of uh, COVID-19 on the rise. GBV was also plateauing. And indeed, it is a very dark and dangerous situation. So I'm not surprised that Interface Media decided that this meeting edition will focus on gender-based violence. Hopefully, through this discourse, we'll try to set agenda on the way forward in search for solution. Try to build public confidence that actually we can have solution to this issue. Mobilize our colleagues and people in other parts of Sub-Saharan Africa to speak and gradually fight this issue of gender-based violence, which has reached a level of what I would say is impunity because people are doing it and getting away with it. I'm optimistic that putting gender-based violence on the front burner will give citizens the necessary push to demand from duty bearers action that will address some of these things and prevent and mitigate gender-based violence. For us, it will also be like the host said, we're going to have other sessions to be an opportunity, to be a platform to amplify the voices of the voiceless, also amplify the voices of survivors, and point victims to the direction of seeking for redress such that they can get justice and also reduce the impunity. Today, based on the introduction, it's obvious that we have an array of experts to deal with the topic. So I'm very confident that they will do due diligence on this in the search for a solution to gender-based violence. So on this note, I'd like to hand us over to our host, Akin Akinyemi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for the very kind words. But, Prof, there's a question I have for you before we go on. About 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks
Okay.
ago, when this topic was initially raised by somebody, they had GBV in the note of what they sent to me, and I looked at GBV and I was, what is that? Now I shared that on one of the WhatsApp platforms that I'm on, and that created some discourse because people started saying, what is this? Is this domestic violence? Is this? Is it that? And I thought, hang on, what is it? So, Prof, please help to explain, what exactly does this cover? Is it just a fancy name that's been given to something that hides the real narrative about it? Help us out, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. Um, Gender-based violence is derived from the word violence. And what is violence? It's anything that results in physical, psychological, sexual harm to male or females. It can also come in the form of coercion, arbitrary deprivation of your liberty. Somebody comes and says, well, you can't go out. Another person says, oh, either person can tell you, whether it's a duty bearer or it's a spouse, can say, you can't do this, you can't do this. They try to limit your liberty. It can be in form of coercion. It could be in form of physical harm. It's a form of violence, and it happens to males and females, whether it's a woman, boy, girl, a man. It's there. But it is referred to as gender-based violence because it has got that face. And UN came up with that based on the fact that it is done more to the females than to the males. It's not as if men don't suffer from violence. People don't inflict violence on men, but it is more on women, and rightly so, because of physical strength of male versus female. So it's seen more that it happens to women and or females. And when you look at global statistics, it will speak to this. One in every three women must have suffered, or females will have suffered one form of violence or the other. And that is why they say it's gender-based violence. And that's why we refer to it as GBV.
Thank you, Prof. Let me go to Doc to start off with. Doc, in your field of work, are you also seeing GBV as an issue that is coming up more often?
Thank you for that question. I don't think it's an issue that is coming up more often. I think it's an issue that has been very pervasive all this while. The only difference is that now people are talking more about it. So it's almost like a pandemic that has been there all this while, but the veil is being lifted off currently. And then people are more vocal and more able to come out to the fore to talk about it. So in my practice, I've noticed many patients, and the trend I notice is that people are now more comfortable to talk about it, even though it's been around for a very, very long time.
All right. We have Johnson here, who we would want to ask. He's got a question that he wants to put to the panel. Johnson, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, so good evening, everyone. So I have two questions that I want to just briefly ask. So one is, given the widespread nature of gender-based violence across countries and continents, and the statistics from the World Health Organization that 1 in 3 women has experienced some form of gender-based violence. So what kind of provisions do we have in law to address these kinds of issues? Then the second question is, so what would be your advice to those newly married couples, but in particular ladies here, who are presently experiencing one form of gender-based violence or the other in their marriages. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. All right. I think, Mr. Adebayo, the first question is probably something for you to handle there. Do you want to address that question first?
Yes, I do. I believe the speaker is referencing Nigeria, and not the UK. Like you said, I practice in both countries. For the UK, we've got it covered. Things dealing with domestic violence, sexual exploitations, the law are there, and we apply the law fully. In Nigeria, it depends on the part of the country where you are, the part of the country where you are. So in places like Abuja, Lagos, Oyo, Ekiti, we have laws that are specific to gender-based violence. However, if you go down to the north, where we still use what we call the penal code, it is quite difficult to not just getting a conviction, but even to bring matters that has to do with GBV to court. So, in summary, yes, we do have laws, but it is particular to states. It's not national. It's the spread is not that it's not national, unfortunately. But progress has been made, and like the doctor said, there is more awareness, and people are speaking up. And I believe as people are speaking up, the National Assembly will listen and make laws that will reflect that this is a pandemic, to be honest.
All right, Prof, let me come to you for the second question from Johnson there, in terms of what sort of advice would you give to someone who's just gotten married and is experiencing this kind of issue in that marriage? What kind of advice do you give to that person?
Well, thank you very much. It's unfortunate, but there's always solution to those issue, and there's no one cap fits it all for all. It depends on the situation. But generally, there will have been kind of things to look out for you to know that someone violent. And sometimes too, I think I'm happy the board certified psychiatrist is here. So many things could lead to it. Some men may not show such traits pre-marriage, and someone gets married to such a person. The reality is that there are so many dimensions to it because of the stigma attached to people who get separated or they are divorced, and the kind of operating environment, like our legal expert said, this person is asking this question in Nigeria. So people will say it's better to remain married than to leave the marriage. And based on that, some people have actually lost their lives in the process. So they have to study the situation, go for counseling, and look at the realities. Like one preacher, the preacher is late. She said that when it gets to the point of violence, she will not encourage anybody to remain in that marriage. She will encourage them to separate. And after review it if they need themselves. If they don't need themselves, then they proceed to end it. But most times when you go to some religious leaders, they will pray about it and they will continue, but they will not live with you inside that house. So you have to decide what is more important to you. It's either your life is more important to you, marriage is more important to you. And if they get, after they find out there's peace, they have realized their mistakes, and there is a sign that it's not going to occur again. That's why you have the word separation. They can come back together, but know that your to go is
All right, I think we had some bandwidth issues there from what Prof was saying, but I think the crux of the issue there is a societal issue there that needs to be addressed, and I think we will come back and deal more with that particular point in terms of how you deal with the situation in the context of a marriage. But right now, we have Dr. Babayemi from the United Kingdom who has a question that he wants to ask the panel. Dr. Babayemi. Dr. Babayemi, I think you're on mute.
So sorry, I'll start again. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity. My question is dentally related. We know that generally speaking, adults usually seek dental treatment when they're in pain. And this trait sometimes can be passed on to their children. Of course, children depend on adults to take them for dental service if ever they want to. But what we noticed, especially in the context of gender-based violence, is that this is often not the case. And as a result, it can end up leading to dental neglect. And of course, dental neglect, as we know here in the UK, for example, according to the British Society of Pediatric Dentistry, and allow me to quote what they define dental neglect as. It says it's the persistent failure to meet a child's basic oral health needs, likely to result in serious impairment of a child's oral health, growth, or development. Now, my question to the panel is this: when do you think, especially in the context of gender-based violence, when do you think it's best to intervene to the benefit of the child, rather than wait until something gets seriously bad before we intervene? Thank you.
Doc, do you want to pick that up first and address that point?
Yes, I think
Okay.
the
Was
way.
it talking just?
Go ahead, Prof.
Okay. Was it just referring to the health of the child or other basic things?
1 second. Dr. Babayemi, do you want to clarify your question?
Okay, so yes, it's all the basic things that we're talking about because we're talking in the context of gender-based violence. Really, from a dental neglect perspective, some of the things that we pick up is that you see children with rampant caries where they have multiple cavities in their mouth. I mean, if you see a child of 6 or 7-year-olds with multiple holes or cavities in their mouth, that certainly is not the child's fault. It's got to be the fault of an adult or parent or carer who's meant to have oversight of the child. Now, if for some reason the mother in this case is being abused by the father, then invariably it's going to pass on to the children. And what we see is that sometimes it's best in our judgment to take cognizance of that. And so that's why I'm asking the question, when is it best to intervene? The dental aspect we can fix. It's the other aspects that we're worried about. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. I think, Prof, you have a point there. Do you want to go first and then I'll go to Dr. Osuagwu to answer that?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I think that I like this dimension to this discourse. One of my students did a project on gender-based violence. And she found out, is a lady that did that in cases like this, when they get separated or they get divorced, the children suffer the more. And tying it together based on the question the audience, one of our studio audience asked, the reality is that in current times, people are talking about women empowerment. And most times, not just the woman that suffers the violence, the children also partake from it. And the girl child education, empowerment of women, it's one way to deal with this. Because if a woman is educated, a woman is empowered, she will know the value of preventive health. She will know the value of preventive health. We tell them, when you have your children, make sure you go for immunization, go for checkups and all that. But somebody who is ignorant may not know what to do. And that is where the welfare system will have to come in. That is where the law enforcement officers have to come in. Hopefully, like our host said, next week there will be another opportunity to discuss this. I think one of the panelists will be able to share with us. And our legal expert on this panel talked about the laws. When you talk about Lagos State, for instance, when you report matters like this, the Lagos State government will have a way of getting duty bearers to account. Whoever the parents, particularly the father who has neglected the child, and they have a way of taking over and they move on with the child. And some, they have shelter where they keep those children. If they know that the woman can comfortably stay with the children, they would demand that the father sends support. But here, most times, nobody talks about the children. And Akin, I believe that these are some of the takeaways from this debate, from this town hall meeting, particularly in countries like Nigeria. We're talking about Sub-Saharan Africa, where men go scot-free, where duty bearers go scot-free. They abandon their duties either because they are separated or they are divorced, and the man is busy enjoying himself somewhere. He doesn't know what is happening to the women, to the woman and the children. Or woman, on the other hand, has the economic means and will not be humane enough. A mother should be a mother to think of what to do, to make the child live in good health. And I also think that our healthcare professionals should draw the attention of law enforcement agencies and child rights groups to issues like this. If we don't hide them, impunity will stop. We need to speak out. We need to speak up. So it's a whole round. All of us are involved in it. You have the child rights group, you have the law enforcement officers, you have the medical officers that will notify a state government. I think that happens in Lagos State. For instance, you take your child to them to treat for any form of violence, they will call them. Even if you say, oh, no, I don't want to make any issue out of it, because the laws are there. They also hold the medical experts accountable for not notifying the right state apparatus, the right state structures to deal with it. And that is where enlightenment comes into play, that you have to enlighten us to know what to do. We should continue to sensitize people, sensitize mothers, and sensitize those people who are having custody of the children and they don't have the wherewithal, so that they can seek for help. And government and law enforcement and rights group, we take up such issues.
Thank you for that, Prof. Dr. Osuagwu, what's your take on this issue?
So thank you very much. That's actually a very good question. Usually for management of such situations where you have what the person who asked question was asking about, it's a two-pronged approach. If you're dealing with a minor, by definition, somebody who is less than 18 years old, we as mental health workers or people in position of authority are mandatory reporters. What that means is that if you see anything, be it dental neglect, physical neglect, emotional neglect, anything that you feel could jeopardize the safety of the child or the well-being of that child, you have to report to the Child Protective Services. And I'm assuming in Nigerian context to the welfare system or to the authorities who are saddled with such responsibilities. Now, if you're talking in the context of an adult, so we are talking about somebody who is more than 18, somebody who can make their own choices and decisions. Now, because it's a very challenging situation for most people when it comes to neglect or abuse, you have to meet the patient where they are. What I mean by that is that we have to adopt what is referred to as a survivor-centered approach. You have to allow the patient to make that choice, and you provide the resources and the psychoeducation to let them know, hey, if there is abuse, there are options and choices that you can make to help yourself to be whole or to be away from your abuser. But usually most of the time, if you don't see any safety issue, it's usually left to the adult person who is the victim to actually be proactive, to be willing to, seek out for this help. But if it's a child, you have to report.
Mr. Adebayo, quick question for you here. There's a question here on YouTube that I want to put to you, and I think it's an important one. It says there is increased awareness, but speaking out as a victim of abuse is not really that easy. Though there are laws, but lots of socio-cultural factors keeps victims stuck with their abuser. How do you speak out in that context, Mr. Adebayo? Do you want to help on that?
Yeah. I mean, before I answer that question, I think majority of victims don't even know sometimes that they are being abused. Many see gender-based violence as just about violence. That it's when you actually physically abuse me, maybe through a punch or something like that. But it's more than that. So, like the Prof said, emotional abuse is it comes under GBV. Financial abuse as well comes under it. So people need to be aware of what encompasses this GBV. In terms of speaking out, and in terms of it's a difficult one. It's a very difficult one, and it's mixed with culture, the fact that the stigmatization. It's difficult. It's a very difficult one, and again, I'm talking about in the Nigerian context now. Who do you report to? So we've seen instances whereby you go to the police and you tell the police that my husband beat me up, and the police will say, what is wrong in that? I was talking about the North. Under the penal code, there's a law that actually says that your husband has a right to punish you, to correct you. And correction can be with slaps, it can be with a cane. So it's a difficult one. That is what I would say. It's a very difficult one. To break that cycle will take time, but people just need to keep on pushing and educating people out there.
All right. Thank you for that. There is a question here on from the studio audience. I will read this one out, and I think, Mr. Adebayo, this is one also for you to address here. And this is the fact that we are having quite a lot of there's an increase in the number of cases. How prepared is the legal system to deal with the sorts of cases we're talking about? And just to put this in perspective, there is a report from the United Kingdom perspective that said last year there were about 2 million GBV cases. Of the 2 million, 695,000 were men, right? How can the legal system cope with the kind of volumes that we're talking about here?
It's very well in the UK. I would say we're coping relatively okay. Now courts are doing remote hearings. So although there's a slight delay, but we're doing relatively fine. And where children are involved, cases are put up to up the ladder. In Nigeria, again, it depends on the state where you are in. Lagos is doing well. Lagos is quite proactive. Your state too is doing well. Rivers is doing well as well. There are some states in the south in the southeast as well that they're doing well. But it's tough and it's challenging. Again, it goes back to that question. the society, do we even know that GBV is occurring? If you don't even know, what are you reporting? You know, but I think that the legal system is pushing on. It's quite slow in Nigeria, but like I said, Lagos is the pioneer state when it comes to taking action. They're doing well.
Fantastic. Now we have someone in the virtual studio audience, Vera, who also has a question that she's going to ask. Vera, please unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My question is actually for both victims and perpetrators of gender-based violence. As we are addressing this issue, it is also pertinent to know the question is what level of after-the-fact therapy is enough. For example, a husband who beats his wife blue black had the extended family talk to both parties, who told them to hug themselves and warn the husband not to hit the woman again. Okay, so I would like to know the level of after the fact therapy that is enough for such a case. And one of the panelists just mentioned in the north where it is proper, and if you report to the police, the husband beats the wife, and you said it's a part of the culture, it's a part of the law in the northern Nigeria to beat or to correct the wife. So I'd like to know the level of after the fact therapy is enough for such a case, please.
Dr. Osuagwu, I think this is one for you to start with.
So, in terms of gender-based violence, usually the most important thing is safety comes first. So, if there is issue pertaining to safety, then you need to act to help the person to understand that you have to protect yourself and take conscious efforts to help you in terms of your safety. Now, the next thing is the treatment modalities which we offer. Usually, we have a form of therapy known as trauma-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what we tend to offer to victims of violence. And what this entails is to help the person to, go through the process of actually understanding what led to the abuse, understanding what does abuse mean. Just like Mr. Adebayo just rightly pointed out, sometimes we may not even be aware what abuse is. Abuse is not necessarily somebody physically harming you. It can come in different shapes, forms, and to let the person understand that, and then we help the person to build what we refer to as coping skills to help them to actually understand that, hey, just because you've suffered this abuse does not necessarily mean that you are the person who is at fault. The person who perpetrated the abuse is perpetrating it because they want to do that. And then for the person who is perpetrating the abuse, apart from making sure that they face the legal consequences of their actions, the other thing is providing them with anger management classes. I do know in our culture in Nigeria, we don't understand that sometimes people can actually go for training to help them to figure out how to better manage their anger and control themselves so that they don't resort to physically harming others as a way of, letting out anger or issues going on with them.
Prof, there's a question on YouTube here that I want to put to you because you dealt with it a little bit. And this person is saying that GBV is about women abused. What do we call the situation where men are abused? In recent times, the table is turning and there is an increasing incidence of men being abused by women. How do you respond to that, Prof?
Well, it's like I stated when I was trying to give a definition of gender-based violence, that it happens to both males and females. But the reality is that it happens more to women. The person who posed the question is correct. I think last year or 2 years ago, there was a report by Lagos State government, bringing out statistics of the number of men that have been abused. So the abuse goes both ways. But till date, available statistics show that more women are abused. More women
All right, Prof, you dropped off a little bit there in your conclusion. Oh, okay. Now, let me go back to you, Dr. Osuagwu. And the point I want to raise is this. What goes on in the mind of perpetrators when they're dealing with issues like this? How can we nip it in the bud before this thing even starts to get to the point where the perpetrator starts to do their work? How do you nip it in the bud?
So the key component of this is to have a concerted public enlightenment campaign to let people understand that it is not okay to abuse another human being, either physically, emotionally, or whichever way you have been doing it. It's not okay. And having this kind of discussions and talking to people, it's a good way to start. And then the other thing is that the society itself, as large, it's a microcosm of the individual homes that are each and every one of us come out from. So, as fathers, as mothers, have we had those conversations with our children to let them know, hey, son, it is not okay to abuse another female, or my daughter is not okay to abuse another male, or be verbally abusive towards them. So public enlightenment campaign is one key thing we need to do to try to reach out to people. And then the other thing is that I know in our culture we have this machismo attitude. We don't believe that having therapy sessions, it's something that men should have or what people should have. But it's actually something that can help people who struggle with their moods and emotions to understand that, hey, it's okay to actually get treatment, and somebody can actually walk you through how to manage your anger, how to manage your emotions, so that you don't use negative means to express whatever you might be dealing with inside you.
All right, but how do we address that? How do we get the man? Let's go with the man, right? Who says I don't need therapy, but then there's an underlying issue there. How do you address it?
So usually, what we have, especially in the culture we have, it's an emergence of peer-based, support groups where you can actually talk to a fellow man and say, hey, it's okay to actually expose your weakness and say, or admit that you're human and say, hey, I need help. I need somebody to talk to. Sometimes having another man talking to you to say, you know what, you can walk away. You can take a walk. You can go do something else. You don't have to respond, in an emotionally driven, violent basis for everything that you are upset about. There are ways you can channel your anger. Go take up a sport. Go, take up a hobby or something. Learn how to communicate with your spouse or significant other or people in your life to say, hey, this is how I feel about this, instead of acting in a negative, violent manner towards them. So that's a peer-based solution with other men has helped. And there is a huge drive here known as the Babas Initiative. Men go to have their hair cut. And then these are Babas who have been trained in how to be psychologically minded, because people have conversations and they can drop hints in there as they are cutting your hair to let you know, hey, how are you doing? How is the family? Whatever you're going through, hey, it's okay. You can actually reach out to a therapist or talk to somebody who can help you walk through these issues.
Thank you for that, Dr. Osuagwu. I think we've got Hope Orivri in the virtual studio audience who has a question. Hope, please unmute yourself. Hope, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, hello. Yes, I have done that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have done that. Okay,
we can
fine.
hear you.
Okay. We know that GBV impacts negatively on victims, but we still see a culture of silence. Most people do not speak out of fear of stigmatization or victimization. What do you encourage such victims to do in such instances?
Prof, let me start with you on that one. How do we overcome stigmatization and the fear of that keeping people? And then, Mr. Adebayo, I'll come back to you after that. Prof.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that we are beginning to see more people speak up, though the stigmatization is still there. When the legal expert was addressing the issue of going to the court, I tell you that a lot of things frustrate victims from speaking up. Sometimes you can be in court for 5 to 10 years and you don't get justice. It's that bad. You know, all the adjournments, for instance, in Nigeria, all the adjournments, before you know it, they say they've transferred the IPO. There is the burden on the victim to go look for that. I think that from the legal perspective, the judiciary has to encourage beyond sensitization, because even those that have been sensitized and are aware of their rights, when they try to fight for their rights, the system discourages them from fighting for their rights. But stigmatization, for me, it's better to be alive. And there are so many help groups, self-help groups now, where people are encouraging people to speak out. And on this platform, let me also credit Lagos State government. They went to the extent of, that's the domestic and sexual violence response team, went to the extent of going to sensitize community leaders, sensitize everybody to speak out. And that even neighbors should go and report. And I think we need more of such encouragement. For me, I still maintain that it's better to be a living dog than a dead lion. So people gradually are trying to speak up, and as we continue, we can never have enough of the sensitization, and that's what we're doing here. That, you know, you are human, don't leave yourself to be killed by anybody, because most people that kill their spouses never intended to do hiding. They have been hiding it. And so at the end, you know, it's either they get maimed or they kill them in the process. So we'll continue to encourage them. And that is where our traditional leaders should come in. Our sensitization should go beyond media advocacy. We have to get to a point, just like the example I gave with Lagos State government, where many more states will begin to do that. And as our legal experts said, it's because of the constraints of the law. So as many more states adapt the VAP, you know, Act, you know, we'll have more activities around it. We'll continue to sensitize people. And for me, I always tell them, speak out. You can never, people can say, oh, why are you always complaining? Others are enduring it. As our expert in psychiatry has just told us, you know, first, it's your survivor that, you know, should be uppermost in your mind. You know, it's to be alive. It's when you are alive that you can be in a marriage. It's when you are alive that you can take care of the children. So your safety first. And that is why you have all these protection orders telling this person, don't go there, don't go there. So it's better to speak out. I insist it's better to speak out. And we'll continue to encourage them. And we should also sensitize those people who violence or commit any form of violence that is leading to the impunity. And that is why the numbers are spiking.
Thank you for that, Prof. Mr. Adebayo, do you have a response to that point? So how do you, from a legal perspective, what can you do if someone is not willing to speak out about the issue they're going through? What can you do?
Well, if the person is not a child, there is hardly anything you can do. If the person is an adult and that person decides to keep quiet, unfortunately, there is little or nothing you can do. For a child, just like the professor said, there people who, for example, in the medical field, a doctor, a teacher, they have it's mandatory for them to report to the police if they find out that an abuse has taken place on a child. But going back to that issue of stigmatization, I just want to add to what Prof said. In order for us to, and before I say that, I think things are getting much better. So if we look at when we were young and what our parents, our aunties went through for domestic violence, we can see that there's things are gradually improving, and I believe it will continue to get better. But I think our entertainment industry in Nigeria has a big role to play in this stigmatization issue. I mean, I see skits of people. I think there's some very popular ones like the Tauma and who get hits of like 16, 20 million views. And I think these are the kind of people that can help doing short skits and sensitizing people to the fact that, look, there's nothing wrong in speaking out. There's nothing wrong in, if you're a victim of domestic violence, there's nothing wrong in talking, don't keep quiet. Get out there and talk. Report if somebody's abusing you. Get out there and talk. I like what the Prof said about the barber, where barbers are being trained and they can people can talk to barbers. I mean, that is a brilliant initiative. So yeah, it's stigmatization. It needs to be tackled. It needs to be seriously tackled, and people need to speak up, and people need to be educated and be told that there's nothing wrong in speaking out.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Adebayo. Dr. Osuagwu, there is a question on YouTube here for you that I'm going to read. But before I do that, we have Sam Ejiwumi in the virtual studio audience who has a question. Sam, can you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right, then. Thank you very much. I mean, it's interesting the way gender-based violence are being addressed, and we see a lot of NGOs and advocacy groups they are springing up trying to address the issue, which is a good thing, yeah. However, we could argue that in this part of the world, in Sub-Saharan Africa, corruption is an everyday thing, and justice is not really guaranteed for victims because you see a lot of times where the rich get away with murder and a lot of impunities. There was a recent case where someone spoke about an abuse, and it's an iPad person. In a matter of weeks, the person came out again and recanted the statement, even with the father. What is the view of the panel on issues like this?
So we're talking about advocacy groups and the effectiveness of advocacy groups and the impact of corruption. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Mr. Adebayo, do you want to deal with that from a legal perspective first?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree with what he said about the fact that people do get away with crime, so to say. But I think where this is where the media has a role to play. I remember a case in Ibadan where a woman who used to work, in fact, she's a lawyer, and she used to work in the Attorney General's office. And she stabbed her husband, and she was charged with murder. Because she was a lawyer and she worked in the prosecution's office, they were going to sweep that under the carpet. But because of the media attention that generated at that time, and the fact that the media would not let go of that story, the director of public prosecution had no choice but to follow through with that case. So I think, yes, there's corruption in the system. People do get away with murder, so to say. It depends on how, and it's all over. It happens in the UK, it happens in the States, it's all over. If you can afford a good lawyer, the chances of you getting away with a crime is higher. But going back to the question the gentleman asked, I think the media has a role to play. Once it's in the public domain and they don't let go of that story, people in authority will act.
Thank you for that. Dr. Osuagwu, there's a question here. Prof, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce what the legal expert has said. We've had a case that we've been pursuing, and they've all said, "Oh, go and settle, and it's been on and on." And the victim stood up in court and even took the brief from the lawyer to say, "I want judicial pronouncement on this matter, and that I'm a citizen and I demand the protection of the state." It was then the magistrate had to backtrack to say, "Well, I can't force the victim to settle out of court." Right now, that perpetrator has absconded. They've issued a bench warrant. They can't find him. So I just wanted to reinforce the fact that when you insist on your right, the judiciary, no form of corruption will silence you. And you have the option, of making your views heard. And, you stand your ground. It may take a while, but the wheel of justice is slow, but it will grind the perpetrator to a halt. And we just have to have that at the back of our minds.
Thank you for that, Prof. Dr. Osuagwu, there's a question here which says, what is the medical advice to abused women, especially those who may have some sort of religious connotation to their not wanting to come out? What is your view on the role religion plays in this issue?
Thank you. That's a very, very wonderful question, because I do know from the context of where we're coming from, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, religion plays a very, very huge role in the way we conduct ourselves, what we believe, and what we do. And most of the religions in Nigeria will probably advocate on the side of people staying in their marriage, and divorce is frowned upon, and separating from somebody is frowned upon from most religious contexts, which I know is pervasive in Sub-Saharan Africa. However, having said that, your safety is paramount. Once again, your safety is paramount. There is no substitute to your life. So, if you are having issues with safety, violence is involved, it is time to get help. And also, you might be actually helping the individual, your abuser, if you actually speak out to get help. Because instead of waiting for him to kill you and be sentenced to life imprisonment or sentenced to death, it might be better to be separated for him. Maybe that will be a wake-up call from him or her to get help before things get out of hand. So I understand religion will say stick it out and pray and all that, but then the same Bible also tells us that heaven helps those who help themselves. Okay, so if your safety is at stake, please leave and get help.
Thank you for that, Doc. There is Tosin Adesile. I hope I got that right. Forgive me if I didn't. Please unmute yourself so you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I must commend the organizers and Abigail Ogwezzy-Ndisika. I seen her picture on the flyer. I know I'm going to get certain knowledge added to the ones I have as far as gender-based violence is concerned. So, well, my question is about victims of gender-based violence. How do you help a victim that is not willing to speak up regarding their predicament, particularly when the supposed helpers cannot provide the help needed? How can we manage the situation?
Thank you for that, Tosin. That's an interesting perspective. And Prof, let me start with you on that point, because we are advocating people to speak up. But in this particular case, we're saying speak up to who? If this particular individual you're speaking up to cannot help you, is there still value in speaking up to those individuals? Prof, can you hear me? Oh, I think there's some bandwidth issues there. Mr. Adebayo, do you want to respond to that first? And when we get Prof back, we get her to respond to that.
Okay. To be honest, I'm at a loss. That's a very difficult question. How do you help somebody who doesn't want to be helped? Looking at it from a legal standpoint, there is nothing you can do except to, just like the doctor said, to educate the person and make the person to be aware that, look, you might actually be helping the abuser here, you know, and hopefully if that person sees the big picture, that person will act and talk. Again, I go back to that education, enlightenment. It's very, very important. Why wouldn't somebody who's been abused talk? Again, stigmatization is one of the biggest things. If we can educate people for people to be aware that, to be aware that, look, there's nothing wrong in separating. Society might not like it, but your safety is important. You know, I think we'll be able to get those people to speak up.
Thank you for that. Prof, I think we have you back. Do you want to respond to that question?
Yes, if I got the question, he was trying to find out how we can strike a balance between stigma and the choice to report.
No, what he was saying is a situation where someone wants to speak up, but then the question is, who do you speak up to? If the person you're trying to speak to or you have around you doesn't have the capacity to help you in the situation you're in. Did you get that? Oh, I think we've lost Prof. All right. Babatunde Postino, please forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question? We'll come back to Prof on that question. Go ahead. Please unmute yourself. Seems like we're having quite some bandwidth issues on that end. But okay, I think we have Prof back now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. It's internet, but it's the new
We
normal,
understand.
like I said.
We understand that.
Okay. I think that both certified and the legal experts have spoken to that issue. The reality is that your safety is paramount. And that is why you must report. At least you can even have state protection, even when litigation keeps, the person is barred from seeing you. And for anybody, particularly an adult, once you're both 18, I'm told, once you're both 18, you should know what's right or wrong. And your safety is paramount. And going to throw it before you, you choose whether you want the stigmatization or you choose to die. So I've saved you life and death. So you choose. And we can never stop sensitizing people, because in behavioral change, where you are today will be different from where you will be tomorrow. Today, you may like to say, better you stay and die there. But in a few years, nobody wants to lose a loved one. And perhaps as it gets closer, you've seen somebody that it happened to, you will change your position. So the solution to that is continuous sensitization for people who are victims, is telling and showing all the available options for the person to take a decision. But if it's a minor, I think that once those things are reported, I speak for Lagos State where I am, to take on such issues, and the safety of the child is paramount in a situation like that.
Thank you. Let me try Babatunde Faustino again, just to see if we can get you. Babatunde, I'm switching over to you now. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay, looks like we've still lost Babatunde there. All right, let's move on to our next question here that we have. And this relates to how we address the archaic societal structures that cause people to think, and particularly men, to think, oh, we're superior to the women, and therefore we need to be treated slightly differently from the women. Prof, let me start with you here, because one of the issues, and I think that Mr. Adebayo spoke to this, but I want you to speak to this more, is how do we use the power of media to change the narrative that assumes a rape victim, particularly the female, are always guilty. They're the guilty ones. Then secondly, there is the common view that the victims called for it. It was the victim who put themselves in a situation where they invited the perpetrators. Prof, how do you respond to those two questions? First, the media. Secondly, the fact that the victims were the ones who called themselves and invited the perpetrator.
Okay, thank you. I think that the media surveils the society. They look at what is around, just as you pick this topic and decide to deal. And so during this one media piece that I wrote, within a space of how many months, I could outline several commentaries on GBV. They were published in the newspaper, and so the media is working, and they will continue to work. But sometimes people don't want to speak. The media cannot manufacture. Say, no, please, I don't want to be seen. Nobody should talk about it. I can't talk about it. But we continue with our sensitization. That's the work of the media, and that's why we are here. That is what we're doing, and we'll continue to do it. We can never have enough of it. We'll continue to saturate the environment, with information on what it is, how to identify an abuser, where to seek from, and how to also make the law enforcement agents and the judiciary to do their jobs. So we can never have enough of it. It's we'll continue to do it 360, room for improvement anyway. We are not there, but there's room for improvement. But I think that we also credit much that they have done. And so the second question is on how do you stop an abuser or something?
The second question is the common view. How do you address the common view that the
lady called
victim
for it?
Called for it?
Well, it's very unfortunate to assume that. It's very unfortunate to assume that way. Take this scenario. Let's paint this scenario. When you go, they say, okay, like you said, you called for it. You met the man. Well, you met the man, or some would say some law enforcement officers will even make fun out of the lady. But how do you now address a man who rapes a 2-year-old, a 6-month-old, a 4-month-old? Did that person call for it as well? It's in the brain, like this the medical, the psychiatric expert said. It's in the human brain. That is it's a mindset, and that person needs. Unfortunately, in this sub-Saharan Africa where we're discussing today, people don't see acting in that manner as having a mental health issue. It's a mental health issue. It's a mental state that causes abuse, or that makes the abuser to think of inflicting any form of violence on the victim. But having said that, I also think that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. as we socialize our children, we should begin to talk to them. I come from a family of 5 boys. I'm the only girl. I have 5 brothers. They are very protective of me. They are very protective of me, but some don't, where somebody with, this thing is about power relations. I'm stronger than you. I can overwhelm you. I can do anything about you. So it's about power relations, and we should begin to think in the socialization, how we socialize our children to relate with people, to respect males, to respect females. We are all created equal by God. My biological makeup does not make me a lesser human being. And that is the way to go. Those people who think that it is the fault of the lady, in my opinion, they need the help of our psychiatrist, the expert. The expert, we need to perhaps do a manual or do a special message, to address those people. I think that we also need to focus on that aspect in our communication. We need the perspective of the expert, to begin to re-socialize, people who think that the ladies call for it. We never called for it. The victim never called for it. The child didn't call for it. The husband beating didn't call. The wife beating didn't call for it. Just imagine that you are of the victim. It's about power relation and it's about dominance, and we need to deal with that. It's a mental state.
Thank you for that, Prof. Just before we move on, Babatunde Faustino has put his question. Can we all go on mute? I can hear some noise in the background. But Babatunde Faustino has put his question in the studio audience. Thank you for that, Babatunde. I'm sorry we're not able to show you on here. The question is this: are there any intergovernmental bodies in place that go beyond paper pushing and benefit the rural areas victims? What kind of help do you need from a grassroots perspective? Dr. Osuagwu, let me start with you on that point, because what we're looking at here is, and I think we've seen this a lot, where so many NGOs spring up all over the place. You get funding, but the funding just goes to administrative stuff. It never really helps the people on the ground. What's your take on that point, Dr. Osuagwu?
In terms of grassroots level, there's still a lot of work that we need to do. I don't think we have enough resources for the rural populace that's in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason is that historically we've tend to, push resources, minimal amount of resources towards those areas. But having said that, that creates an opportunity for us to have a different sort of rethinking and to come up with solutions that are local that will help us. For example, each and every one of us is a complex interplay of our genes, the environment in which we are raised, and that's how we, form and shape our views and opinions about issues and things. At the home level, do we have fathers? Do we have peer-based groups in churches within men to let them understand that it's okay for a woman to wear shorts? That is not an invitation for you to sexually, molest her. It's not right for you to take advantage of anyone in any shape or form, irrespective of however they are, attired or not. And these are the kind of conversations we need to have at that grassroots level. If the churches are going to take leadership role because they play a very strong role in how we perceive things, that is something that will be very welcoming, to let the men know that we do not have a right to take what somebody has not given to you. So if a woman says no, no means no. You do not have to force yourself on that individual and now hide under the guise of, well, she asked for it, or maybe she dressed up in a way that provoked me. No, you are only accountable for what you do. You should not allow what somebody else wear or, put on make you do something that is not right. So at grassroots level, there's still a lot of work that we have to do, but there is room for improvement and how we can go about doing this using our own local solutions that can be more sustainable in the long term.
Prof, do you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I think that it's so said. The reality it's beyond mass media messages. Religious leaders want you to sermonize it. And I also think that there should be more engagement with the religious leaders and the traditional leaders on matters like this. Uh, Most times, it's because of religion that people remain in abusive relationships. But God says, um, it didn't. It said it didn't ask to if you can love our spouses the way Christ loved the church, to be thinking of that person from your own perspective. And this uh, preaching should continue. The sermonization on this matters should continue. To be fair, I've seen church bodies that have organized drama, they've done poetry, communities have held community dialogues like this. That way we'll all be in it. We can see the reality and collectively fight GBV, not the government alone, not just mass media from the level, the family unit. And that is why anybody who is a victim requires the support of the family. It's because many people who are victims don't have family support, that they can speak out. If your family, for instance, supports you to speak, going to speak out. But if they work against you, so the family being the smallest unit, the sensitization should be there. And that's why we need to take all these issues to the community level, to the level of the religious bodies. Together we can achieve, together we can fight GBV.
Thank you for that, Prof. Mr. Adebayo, let me come to you. We have about 10 minutes left for the session today, but there's some important points on YouTube and a question here that I want to put to you. A common theme among victims that don't speak out until much later when evidence has been destroyed. So, Mr. Adebayo, what do you do in that sort of scenario where someone was abused maybe as a child, there is now no evidence, and the person is now speaking up 20, 30 years later about issues that occurred when they were younger? How do you deal with this kind of issues? How do you build evidence that's admissible in courts? Mr. Adebayo, I think we've lost your audio there.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I was saying that in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's almost impossible. So past abuses, not just even abuses that have happened long ago. Even for example, again, I go back to the north. If the penal code says that if a child has been abused and the matter gets to court, that there has to be corroborative evidence. That means somebody else must give evidence that abuse occurred, and we know that is almost impossible to for that to happen. If we go back to places like the UK, what they do is, um, they they have investigative techniques, questioning. They bring in experts to see whether this person is telling the truth or not. They look at past history. But when we come back to Nigeria, for example, unfortunately, our police is not that acute to be able to investigate past abuses. It's a shame, but that's the reality. That's the reality.
Thank you for that. There's a question here on YouTube that I would want to pass to the panel. In this case, this person says that the challenge here most times is not stigmatization, but the belief by the victim that the abuse is a private issue and not something to be made public. I know that has been spoken about already to some degree today, but Dr. Osuagwu, how do you address that? right? I think it's a private issue. I don't want to discuss it with anybody. How do you address that?
So, in my practice as a psychiatrist, one thing I come in contact almost on daily basis is scenarios like that, where you have an abuse victim, they tell you about what has happened, and then you give them the resources, how to get legal recourse. And then they will say, you know what, I don't think I want to deal with that. I want to handle this on my own. In as much as we try as much as possible to encourage them to seek legal recourse, but the reality on ground is that if you're 18, it is actually your choice whether or not you want to make a report. If you do not want to make a report and your provider does not see any safety issues, there is pretty much not a lot that your provider can do. And that this comes to the other piece of the whole situation, which is abuse leaves a scar inside you. And the idea of people who are managing your mental health issues is to help you to be whole. And being whole is a personal and a private thing, meaning we have to meet you where you are. So if you feel like you don't want to make this public, and that is the way you're going to feel whole, we might inadvertently traumatize you more if we pressure you to go and report. The only situation where that is thrown out through the windows is if it has to do with a minor or a child, then absolutely we have to report to law enforcement agencies because a child is involved. But if it's an adult, unfortunately, our goal is to make you feel whole. And if that feeling whole means you do not want to make this public, we just have to respect that decision. But we have to also do our fiduciary duty to give you the resources and the psychoeducation about how to get help. But if you don't want to, there is really nothing we can do.
Doc, let me ask one question there. And this is really just echoing something someone has put on YouTube here. And the question is this: can abusers really be helped after the event? Does the sort of medical advice we talk about here, does it really work for someone who has been abused? Can they overcome this?
People who have been abused, who have gone through trauma-based cognitive behavioral therapy, sometimes a lot of them actually, you know, improve in terms of mood and also get better over time. There are some people who might have long-lasting scars which you cannot really erase, but at least when you're doing therapy with them, you give them the skills and the coping mechanisms to help them so that anytime they have flashbacks from those abuse, they can actually use those coping mechanisms to help themselves so that they don't have plummeting of their mood. But in terms of the abusers, some people go through anger management classes and then they improve. But unfortunately, the larger percentage of them are serial abusers, especially people who have other psychopathies involved, people who are antisocial, who don't have any empathy for other people. They might become serial offenders and keep, repeating the same situation on and on and on again. But there are some people who might take the help from mental health professionals and actually improve.
Thank you for that. And I want to say a big thank you to all the panelists for being here today, giving up your time. And I'm going to have to apologize to some of those we have in the virtual studio audience who maybe we haven't been able to get to your questions. This conversation will continue next week. We want to hear the perspective of somebody working on the grassroots, working with people who are abused, who have gone through one form of trauma or another, who may have overcome the situation, and also those who maybe are still going through that issue. So we'll walk to that for next week. So this conversation can continue and we can continue to raise awareness about this very crucial issue. Prof, we have about 2 minutes to go. Do you have any parting shots that you want to share in the 2 minutes?
Well, use to thank panelists and studio audience and those, for this town hall. There is a place for gender-based violence stuck to our development. It's an obstacle to peace in the society, and together we'll fight gender-based violence because it's a threat to human rights. It's a threat to the dignity of the person. And a nation can only be built from homes where peace reigns. So let us fight gender based violence and violence in any form so that we can have a peaceful society. Thank you very much for joining us, and the discussion continues.
Prof, thank you for your time. We really appreciate that. To all those on in the studio, thank you so much. I hope you have learned one or two things from the conversation. Please use the hashtag TME Town Hall if you want to share any comments about this session. And for those who are on YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, thank you very much for your contribution to the session. We appreciate your help in being here. Dr. Osuagwu, thank you once again. Congratulations on your
Thank you.
appointment. Mr. Adebayo, thank you again for being here. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week for those who can make it. Thank you.